What is good or bad in the evolutionary mindset? See, the evolutionary mindset that says, hey, ladies and gentlemen, we are nothing but chemicals that have gotten together over billions of years and evolved into what we now are today. That worldview can never say what should or ought to be the case. We have what's known as the is-ought problem. What we can say is this is what happened. We can never say this ought to happen. Evolution can never say what ought to be the case. It can only say what is the case. Again, I go back to my analogy with mathematics. How do we know that 2 plus 2 equaling 5 is closer than 2 plus 2 equals 5 million? Because we know the true answer. The true answer is 4. Without knowing the truth, you cannot in any way know what is a better answer. In the same way, when it comes to morality, if we don't know what is moral, what morality is, we can never, ever, ever say that something is better than another. I would argue, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would assume that Bernie would think that helping an old lady across the street is better than molesting a child for fun. I'm going to assume that. Here's the problem. You can't know what is better if you don't know what the best is. If you don't know what correct morality is, you can never say that this is better than that. I'm sure, and this is just based on my experience with atheists, he'll probably argue something like this, and please correct me if I'm wrong when I'm done here, okay? This is just what I've typically heard. Well, good, moral, is that which helps society. Or good is that which does the least amount of harm to people. Here's the problem. If I ask the question, why is it wrong to harm people? The only answer we could give is an opinion. Well, I think it's wrong to harm people. We can never appeal to an absolute morality in that worldview. Here's another interesting thing. The laws that govern morality. Let me ask you something. Well, I guess I can't really ask you something because that would get crazy here. But think to yourself, are moral laws, are they absolute?
No.
If we say that, remember you're supposed to answer inside, Mike. If we say, no, they're not absolute, then let me ask you something. Is it possible that at some time in some country, molesting children for fun will be right? That will be the right thing to do. I don't see very many people shaking their head, yep, it'll be one day that could be the right thing to do. No. Why? Because you're appealing to an absolute morality. So we find out that the laws of morality are unchanging. They don't change. I mean, let me ask you something. Will there ever be a time in history when the laws of morality change? I mean, I'm not talking about our understanding, by the way. I'm talking about the actual laws. Our understanding may change, but the actual laws themselves. And let's use an extreme example just for this illustration. Will there ever be a time when we can say, hey, one day molesting children for fun will be the right thing to do? No. Why? Because the moral laws that govern us are unchanging. Here's another interesting thing. Moral laws are not made out of matter, are they? I mean, I can write down what my moral code is. I can codify the moral law, but this is not the actual moral law. This is a representation of the moral law. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but well, the laws of morality are not material in nature. You can't go down to the hardware store and buy a law of morality, put it in a jar, paint it red. You can't do that, okay? They're immaterial. The laws of morality are immaterial, they're unchanging, and one more thing, guys, they are universal. They apply everywhere. In other words, now what you're talking about, some of you are shaking your head, no, they're not. What we're talking about is cultural relativism. We're not talking about absolute moral laws. In other words, could we say that, you know what? In another country, molesting for children for fun is the right thing to do over there. That is morally right. Are there cultures that practice some things that we would disagree with today? Absolutely. Does that make them morally correct or right? No, it does not. If it did, then you could never have a cultural revolution. If that was correct and society governed morality, then Martin Luther King should have kept his mouth shut. We should still have African Americans as slaves today if cultural relativity was true. We should not be going to another culture and saying, here's what's right and here's what's wrong and you're doing it wrong and we want you to fix it. Because it's all culturally relative. If that is the case, we have no business going to another culture and saying what you're doing is wrong. We should not have bothered Adolf Hitler. He was doing fine according to his cultural morality. The truth is, every single one of us knows moral laws are universal, they are immaterial, and they are unchanging. They don't change from time to time. Absolute moral laws do not change. Don't confuse that. I'm not talking about our understanding. I'm talking about the actual laws of morality. Here's my question. How does the strictly material world, that Bernie described himself as a naturalist, how does the strictly material world come up with an immaterial law? How does matter come up with something that is not made out of matter? How does a universe that, according to Bernie's worldview, is always changing, it's always evolving, how does it come up with unchanging laws of morality? Laws that do not change. They're constant. These laws are universal, immaterial, and unchanging. The secular worldview, the humanist worldview that Bernie believes in atheism, says that things are always changing, says that they're always changing, they're not universal, and everything's made out of matter. That worldview cannot account for universal, immaterial, unchanging laws of morality. By the way, it's the same with laws of logic, laws of science, and laws of mathematics. The strictly material world could never come up with laws of logic, science, math, and morality that are universal, immaterial, and unchanging. You know what can? A universal, get this, a universal, immaterial, unchanging God. Without absolute moral laws, you can never say what ought to be the case. You can only say what is the case. Morality inherently tries to say, here's what ought to be the case. Without God, you got a serious is-ought problem. What you can say is, this is the case. Here is what happened. You can't ever say, here's what ought to happen.